Well, the Queen's coffin was removed from the Abbey ahead of a second procession to Windsor for a committal service, and the Queen's interment later. The King and members of the royal family again walked behind Her Majesty. The Queen Consort, the Princess of Wales, the Duchess of Sussex and the Countess of Wessex, followed by car. The procession, including detachments from the armed forces of the Commonwealth, made its way through Parliament Square. Big Ben tolled throughout the slow march onto Whitehall and past the Cenotaph. The procession then made its way down the Mall, taking the Queen past Buckingham Palace for one final time. At Wellington Arch, the coffin was transferred to the State Hearse ahead of its journey to Windsor. And as the procession departed, the parade and the King gave a royal salute as the national anthem was played. Huge crowds lined the 30-mile route to Windsor, applauding and throwing flowers as the procession went by. On arrival in Windsor, the State Hearse joined the procession ahead of the journey up the long walk to St George's Chapel. The procession was led by a dismounted attachment of the Household Cavalry, with pipers and drums and a band from the Coldstream Guards. Queen Elizabeth's remaining corgis, Mick and Sandy, waited for the arrival of her funeral procession in Windsor. The dogs will now be cared for by Prince Andrew and his former wife, Sarah, Duchess of York. The King and members of the royal family then joined the procession in the quadrangle at Windsor Castle. Minute guns were fired on the east lawn by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. The procession ended at the bottom of the west steps of St George's Chapel, where the bearer party lifted the coffin from the State Hearse and carried it in procession up the west steps. The 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards provided a guard of honour. The King and senior royals followed the coffin inside for the committal service. The Dean of Windsor gave a reading from Revelation 21, verses 1 to 7. The same passage was read at the funerals of the Queen's father, King George VI, in 1952, and her grandparents, King George V in 1936 and Queen Mary in 1953.
I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son.
After the final hymn, the King placed the Queen's Company camp colour of the Grenadier Guards on the coffin.
In the name of Jesus Christ, who suffered for thee, in the name of the Holy Spirit, who strengtheneth thee.
The Dean of Windsor then led the committal, followed by the pronouncing of the styles and titles of Queen Elizabeth II for one last time. The coffin was lowered ahead of the private burial this evening. Afterwards, the Queen's piper played a lament. Before the national anthem was sung once more. The King then departed St George's Chapel, thanking those who had taken part in the service. The King was quickly followed by senior members of the royal family. Well, our royal correspondent Laura Bundock is here with us. And Laura, we're not really even at the end yet, are we? This was the far more familial and the service for the friends and the people that the Queen treasured close to her. But there is another service a little bit later.
That's right, and I think after the climax of the ceremony we saw earlier on at Westminster Abbey, it was much more personal. It's a smaller event here, a smaller occasion. We know the Queen over several years had been very involved in discussing how the service would look, how it would sound, and that was certainly reflected in what we saw there as she arrived back here in Windsor, the place she called home, a place she loved, a place we know she could relax. I mean, right back to when she was a young teenager, time spent here during the war, putting on performances of pantomimes, up until the present and recent months spent here in lockdown in the Windsor bubble, as it were. This is the homecoming for the Queen, a very personal service. So the general congregation made up of household staff, people who would have worked very closely with the Queen, who would have known her well, some of whom for decades and decades. And then no more cameras. There'll be no more crowds, no more congregations, as the family will gather here for their final goodbye. And I think no cameras, that very private moment, perhaps a moment all of us who've lost someone close to us will resonate. It'll resonate with us, a moment we've all been there. There won't be anyone we won't see this moment as they can, in private, say goodbye.
And we're also joined by one of those loyal members of staff, Dick Griffin, former Royal Protection Officer. You were inside that service. Just talk to us about what was going through your mind as you sat in the chapel there this afternoon.
It was... I fully expected to be able to cope with that. I've seen all these. I'm a roughy-tufty protection officer. But, my gosh, it was emotional. I had a seat just inside the west door, so straight away, if I wanted to, I could have put my hand out and touch the coffin. And to see Her Majesty, you know, it's the final thing that's ever that I'm involved with the Queen after 27 years. And as my wife said recently, I've spent more time with the Queen in recent years than I've spent with my wife. And so to see it, and it was also very special to be in there this afternoon, because Laura said I knew 60–70% of the people in there. It was either staff or people who work for her in various things. And everyone was just getting up. We were all in there about 2 hours before the service started. So everyone was getting up, shaking hands, saying hello, giving hugs. And so everyone was there to support each other and give each other comfort.
Which is just like any other funeral,
Absolutely.
isn't it? And you knew the Queen well. You've spoken about the hilarious incident where she was mistaken on the hillside up in Scotland by American tourists, and she said that you'd met the Queen. She clearly had a sense of mischief, didn't she? Oh, she did. And, you know, that story demonstrates it. And my children have said if I tell it ever again, they're going to cut me off and never speak to me ever again. I think it's had something like 21 million views on Twitter. But the Queen did lots and lots of things too. I mean, I remember I ran for Blackheath and Bromley Harriers, and when I did my 100th marathon, they had a little party, and the Queen very graciously sent a letter along. And one of the lines she put is, "Aren't you lucky to have such a wonderful employer who allows you so much time off to take part in these events?" And that was just typical of the Queen. And Laura, just touching on that, as we arrived here today, we saw lots and lots of members of staff, because of course Windsor Castle is a working castle, lining the route here, and it was very, very staff-heavy, that congregation, wasn't it? And the fact that so many of these people had given almost their whole lives of employment to the Queen, she was somebody who inspired a great deal of loyalty. That's right. I mean, it was the general congregation. With people who knew each other, people who had worked past and present. So we saw really old people coming here who would have these really long memories going way back, and even the staff that couldn't make it into the chapel were lining Chapel Hill here. We could see them bowing their heads as the coffin procession went past, and some really lovely personal touches. We know the Queen was involved in this service, and as we saw the coffin procession coming up the long walk, her favourite horse, Emma, was there, riderless. It was such a moment. And the two corgis, her most recent corgis, Mick and Sandy, were waiting as well. And I don't know if that was something she'd written into it. Perhaps you might have more of an idea. But you kind of think, or maybe a bit of us hopes it was, actually, because she was so well known for her love of horses, for her love of her dogs as well. They were always busying around at her feet, weren't they? And the image of her riding her fell ponies in the garden, in the grounds here, are quite iconic, aren't they? Something she did really up until quite recently. And I think it was a lovely touch there, and as I say, a touch perhaps that had been orchestrated in advance by the Queen. And Dick, what I thought was especially lovely was those touches came just after she came in through the Cambridge Gate up the long walk, and it felt like this was the moment that it passed from being this very public day, this state funeral. As soon as she crossed into Windsor Castle, which had been her home, it was the horse and the corgis. It was all of a sudden about her and about the things that made her smile and made her laugh after her sense of duty. Absolutely, and as Laura says, it's all now going to become very, very private. You know, she'll be interred later on with the Duke of Edinburgh in the King George VI chapel. They'll be brought back together again and laid to rest side by side, and along with her parents, and of course the ashes of Princess Margaret are there as well. So it's all very profound. And Dick, am I right that you were due to have lunch with the Queen in the coming weeks? On the 18th of October, yes. She'd invited 11 of us to join her for a very private lunch, just to go over some memories. And but I'm pleased to say that the gentleman organising it rang me up. Well, I saw him in there today and said, we're going ahead with the lunch regardless, so to celebrate the Queen, so that'd be great. And is it right that you were the 12 people, including yourself, chosen who made her laugh? Well, I've never apparently so, yes. I'm not quite sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we certainly had lots of happy, laughing moments during the time. I've been telling all the stories all week, and my friends and colleagues have heard them a million times beforehand. But what's been interesting, when we go off air, I get text messages from my son or from my friends saying, "You haven't told the story about so-and-so." And I thought, "Oh, yeah, I forgot about that." We'll maybe have to keep you on and get you to tell us some more. Dick Griffin, former Royal Protection Officer, thanks so much for joining us. And Laura, just remind us very briefly what is going to happen now this evening, what we're expecting to happen at 7:30.
7:30, close members of the family will gather at the King George VI Memorial Chapel, and that's where the Queen will be laid to rest alongside Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, and we know that's where the remains of her father, her mother and her sister are as well, but it will be completely private. A very, very quiet moment for the family to gather there. It's a very small space. The Queen commissioned this chapel herself finished back in 1969. And it'll be, as I say, that most intimate of times for the family as they say one final goodbye.
Laura Bundock and Dick Griffin, thank you both so much. We'll be bringing you more from Windsor in a moment. But first, let's hand you over to SJ.
So, the nation and the world has been saying farewell to Britain's longest-serving monarch. As was mentioned there, 7:30 this evening, members of the royal family will gather for a private interment of Queen Elizabeth. But it was much earlier that proceedings began. Dignitaries from across the world travelled to Westminster Abbey for the start of the Queen's state funeral. I'm joined now by Scott Fursdon-Wood, the British High Commissioner to Barbados. He was previously Deputy Private Secretary to the King when he was the Prince of Wales. High Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Inside 10 days, the monarchy has changed. How was Barbados reflecting on that today? These scenes beamed around the world of the Queen's state funeral.
Well, it's been a global event, of course, and there's been recognition of that everywhere. There's been sorrow here. We've had a lot of people come in and sign our condolence book over the past week, and that's a scene that's been common to all of our embassies and high commissions around the world, because, of course, it's not just in the UK that we're mourning the loss of our monarch. The Commonwealth is also mourning the loss of the head of the Commonwealth and a figure who's been a familiar face in everyone's lives for as long as anyone can remember.
It really is the end of an era, the end of the Elizabethan era, and so many questions have been asked up until this point and will be asked again in the coming months and years about the Commonwealth. And the question, was Queen Elizabeth the one holding it all together? We now have a new king, King Charles. And what does the future look like for the Commonwealth under the new king? Can he form the same sense of unity, or will other Commonwealth nations, you think, join the likes of Barbados and want to separate, become a republic?
Well, I think the remarkable thing about the Commonwealth is how it has adapted and changed to circumstance over the years. And it has its roots, of course, in the British Empire, but it's now a free association of independent countries, 15 of which have the king as their head of state, but the rest of them are republics or have monarchies of their own. And so even if another country were to decide to change its constitutional arrangements, as Barbados did last year by becoming a republic, it seems pretty clear that those countries will remain committed to the Commonwealth as a family of nations, as an organisation which is tackling some of the biggest issues facing our planet, whether it's issues of social justice, whether it's issues of climate change and the environment, whether it's issues of democracy and the rule of law. The Commonwealth will have a bright future for as long as it's focused on those issues that matter. And the new king, as head of the Commonwealth, is absolutely determined, I know, to ensure that the Commonwealth has real relevance in the lives of its citizens. A third of the world's population lives in the Commonwealth, and it's absolutely essential that the Commonwealth itself serves the interests that matter most in people's lives.
And despite becoming a republic, as you mentioned there, many people have come to sign your book of condolence there in Barbados for the late monarch. Is there still a great affection for the Queen and the royal family in Barbados?
I think there are ties between the United Kingdom and Barbados, just as there are between the United Kingdom and so many other parts of the Commonwealth. Historic ties, institutional ties, people-to-people connections. And in many ways, the Queen and the royal family for a long time embodied those ties. But last year, of course, Barbados decided to sever those ties with the monarchy and to become a republic. But at that point of separation constitutionally from the Crown, it was clear that the ties between our countries remained as strong as ever. And that's a commitment that the Prime Minister here, Mia Mottley, made. It's a commitment that our government made. And in fact, the Prince of Wales, as he was then, came here in Barbados for that time of transition to show that even as there was that change in constitutional arrangements, the connections between us, between our people, remain as strong as they've ever been.
As I mentioned in your introduction, you were Deputy Private Secretary to the then Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall. So much has been made over the last 10 days of a lifetime of preparation for this role as King. What did you witness in those private moments with the now King and Queen Consort about how they knew this moment was going to come? So much has been said about how everybody prepared for this moment, the passing of the Queen, but it still took people by surprise. I think Prince William alluded to that when chatting to crowds earlier on this week.
Well, and the King himself said that this was a moment he'd been dreading. None of us want to anticipate the death of a parent, of course, but he's always known that this was his destiny, that one day he would become king. And he's been Prince of Wales for longer than anyone has ever held that position before. So he's had a lifetime preparing for this moment, a lifetime understanding our country and the other countries where he's now head of state, a lifetime traveling the world on behalf of the United Kingdom. In the 4 years I was with him, we visited some 40 countries, and that's just a very small proportion of the visits that he's made around the world over the years. So he knows the world, he knows the leaders, he knows the history and the issues. And so in many ways, he's perfectly equipped now to take on this new role, not just as the head of state of the United Kingdom and of the other Commonwealth realms, but as our country's top diplomat out there in the world, building connections and representing us overseas.
As you mentioned there, he becomes head of state, head of the Commonwealth, but he's also head of a family grieving. We know that at 7:30 tonight there is going to be that private moment between the royal family, because this is a family that, like any other in any part of the world, is grieving the death of a matriarch, a much-loved family member. How difficult do you think that has been to do it in the public eye, regardless of a lifetime of service, and how much you've prepared for this moment?
It's been the striking feature of the past 10 days, I think, that we've seen that combination of the deeply personal, a family in mourning, a king who's lost his mother, a family that have lost their grandmother, their great-grandmother, with the state business, the transition, the business of monarchy, the transition from one reign to another. But at the core, of course, is a family who are grieving, but also a king who is leading the nation, leading the world, really, in that mourning of his mother. When I worked for him, we would often meet people, he would often see people who had themselves suffered bereavement, knowing that he could offer them some comfort. He's a man with incredible empathy for people who are suffering, people who have lost something. And so to see him now in that position himself, but at the same time leading the nation in grief is something that I personally found incredibly touching, because I know he will have felt that sense of duty very keenly today, that even as he says farewell to his own mother, he has to, as our king, lead the nation in mourning the loss of our sovereign.
Just as we look at images of the royal family in the procession earlier on today, can we talk about what kind of king Charles will be in terms of, you talk about his empathy. He has so much passion for so many different projects, one of them being the environment, of course. He's a very curious man, we know that. What kind of king will he be in terms of the monarch very much has to temper their views. It's all very much behind closed doors. They can't offer too much opinion. We saw a lot of that from him as the Prince of Wales. How will he make that transition to monarch?
Because he's been Prince of Wales for so long, we know more about him than we've probably known about any monarch at the point of their accession. We know what he thinks about a lot of issues. He's often described as a man ahead of his time because he's had views on the environment in particular, as well as a number of other issues, which now have become mainstream. His views are views that are widely held. But in all the time I was with him, he knew that he could use his office, his unique position, to bring people together to talk about issues, to encourage people to have conversations about the things that he thought were important. But I never heard him telling people what he thought they should think. He would invite people to say what they thought and to debate things and to question each other and talk about the issues. That power of convening, bringing people together, was something that he knew he had to use very, very wisely, and always did. And so, of course, he knows that as king, he has to do things in a different way. Of course, he will, as we saw in his address, his first address to the nation, he's committed himself to serving, just as his mother did, with service and with love. But I'm sure he'll also bring himself to this new role. As you say, he's a very empathetic person, a very human individual in an utterly extraordinary position. And so as he conducts the office of monarch, as he fulfills that role that he's waited so long to fill, he'll bring his own personality, his own self with him to that role, as well as the vast amount of experience that he's gathered during more than 5 decades as Prince of Wales.
Scott Fursdon-Wood, British High Commissioner to Barbados and former Deputy Private Secretary to the then Prince of Wales, now King Charles. Thank you for your time. Well, I'm joined now by May Parsons, who issued the first COVID-19 vaccination in England and was presented with the George Cross by Her Majesty the Queen back in July. May, good of you to join us this evening. You were part of today's procession. Can you give us an idea of what that was like for all of those watching it on the screens? It looked incredible. Give us some sense of what it was like to be there.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was an absolutely surreal moment in time, and it's obviously a real privilege and honour to be able to represent the whole of NHS England in this momentous event of saying our farewell to our late Queen. And it was obviously, paying homage to her and paying our respects to her. It's been a somber day, but obviously also a day to kind of celebrate the service that she's done for her people, the lives of the people that she's affected, and it's kind of our farewell service to her. It's an honour to be a part of it and to represent NHS England.
Yeah, you talk about it being an honour for you to be part of that on behalf of the NHS. To be part of it with the armed forces and so many other representatives from different quarters, does that give us an idea of how much the Queen regarded the National Health Service and what it does for the people?
Absolutely. I think, I'm truly grateful for the staunch support of the Queen and, of the NHS and what it stands for. And clearly her service to her people is what the NHS does as well. So for me as a nurse, that is something that I look up to in terms of also trying to fulfil my promise to serve my community, which obviously the Queen has been doing all her reign. The NHS people, she regarded them so high enough that she's given us the George Cross Award last July, and for her to actually personally give it to us is obviously a sign that she truly regards NHS and what we stand for quite highly, and we can't be any more grateful for the support.
May, can you talk us through what it was like to be presented with the George Cross Award by Her Majesty the Queen? It happened earlier this summer. Talk us through what happened, what she said, how you felt. It must have been an incredible moment.
Absolutely. It was something that never in my entire life I would have thought that I would be, having the honour to do. Just thinking about it now makes me kind of teary because I know that when the Queen welcomed us in her home, it was a truly surreal moment, not just for me, growing from the Philippines and coming over half across the world, and to be welcomed by Her Majesty the Queen in her home and how she made us feel is truly remarkable, and it's something that obviously I will never ever forget. To be regarded by the Queen and to be awarded the George Cross on behalf of all of the magnificent and marvellous staff of the NHS, it's been phenomenal, and it's not something that you would think that someone of her status would be making me feel. It made my respect for the Queen so much more, and obviously I don't think there's anything that's probably going to exceed that experience. it was surreal and such a privilege and such an honour that obviously the first thing that she's done and, you know, seeing people the first time after COVID was us. So, yeah, it's just magical and it's surreal and it didn't seem real at that time. And she said to me one night, she asked me what I do. I said I look after my COVID wards and I did the first vaccination, and obviously the chief executive from the NHS was with me, Amanda Pritchard, and she told the Queen that I did the first COVID vaccination outside of clinical trials. She asked me if I was still alive. So I was almost kind of like, I was exhausted, but yes, I'm still alive. So her humour, her sense of humour, and the way that she's made us comfortable and welcomed in her home was absolutely superb. And when we sat down to have our photographs taken, she's obviously told us not to look glum in the photos, just make us feel at ease. And she's truly, you know, she made us truly felt welcome, and she's really wonderful to be with, even though it was only a few minutes.
Oh, May, it sounded like such a special moment, and just you getting emotional about it really sort of puts across just what it meant to you and your colleagues, because the Queen made that speech during COVID and it was referenced in Westminster Abbey, where she said, "We will meet again." And a lot of people, that phrase resonated through COVID as a sign of hope. Is that something that was going through your head during the service?
Absolutely.
Just remembering that phrase that
absolutely.
she used.
Yeah, I think, you know, all throughout COVID and obviously throughout the difficult times that we've been going through, especially now more with the COVID happening, I think we looked up to the Queen, you know, with her indomitable strength, with her I don't know, effortless to get people together in times of really hardship, really. And we look up to her and think, you know, she obviously represents so much strength, and you look up to her and you think, well, actually, you can almost kind of feel the peace and the strength that she tells people, and the way that she holds herself and the calmness, you know, and for her and the service that she does and the way that she treats her people and the positive things that she's done to a lot of lives. You know, she's touched so many lives across the globe. This is something that obviously as nurses we do, so we try and positively affect the community that we serve, and she's done that tremendously well throughout her reign. And yeah, so I think we've lost our Queen, but clearly we also celebrate the things that she's done for many of us.
That's one of the break. May Parsons presented with the George Cross Award by Her Majesty the Queen in July, who issued that first COVID-19 vaccination in England via the NHS. Thank you so much for telling your story here on Sky News. We can tell just how much today and that moment back in July meant to you. Thank you. May Parsons there. Now, the Queen's state funeral has been marked across the nations of the United Kingdom today. Our senior island correspondent David Blevins witnessed events at Hillsborough Castle in County Down.
Well, the funeral may be over, but the flowers keep arriving here at Hillsborough Castle in County Down. In the last 2 days, nearly 30,000 people have come here to pay their respects. And this morning, the parish church just across the street was one of the locations in Northern Ireland where the public could gather to watch proceedings on a large screen. There were grandparents there of the Queen's generation, some very young children too, whose parents felt they needed to be with other people to appreciate the history they were witnessing. People were visibly moved by the sight of the Queen's coffin, by the dignity of the procession and by the solemnity of the music, and told us it had all added to their sense that the world as we've known it is never going to be the same again.
I think just, you know, the past week, just the outpouring that you have seen from everybody, and just, you know, everybody has what they have said. She really was a people's person and just made everybody feel at ease. And yeah, she was just a wonderful character. I think she'll be very, very hard to replace it. Big shoes to fill.
I think it's very sad, and as been said many, many times in the last few days, definitely the end of an era. And I think it leaves a little bit of uncertainty because she was so constant. So I think it's very sad.
I think she was a wonderful lady, that she reached out to everyone she met. and put people at their ease, and very much so here welcomed us and welcomed the South to speak together.
People here were very glad to see Ireland's head of state, President Higgins, and the Irish Prime Minister, Taoiseach Micheál Martin, in attendance. Nothing unusual about that, of course, but the attendance by the Sinn Féin First Minister-designate of Northern Ireland, Michelle O'Neill, was, of course, significant. Remember, Sinn Féin MPs don't take their seats at Westminster because they refuse to swear allegiance to the monarch. So her presence in Westminster Abbey was a very public acknowledgement of the very personal role the Queen herself played in the journey towards peace and reconciliation on this island and between these islands, and I think it is for that more than anything else that she will forever be remembered on this side of the Irish Sea.
Sky's Dan Whitehead has been in Aberfan in South Wales at a memorial garden built to remember 144 people killed when a coal tip slid down a mountainside, engulfing the village back in 1966.
Well, there is perhaps nowhere else in Wales which feels a stronger connection to Her Majesty than the former Welsh mining village of Aberfan. That disaster, as you mentioned, back in 1966 happened right where we are stood. We are stood in the Garden of Remembrance, which was the former site of Pantglas Junior School. It is here in October of 66 that a colliery spoil tip came down the hillside here, engulfing this school. It killed 116 children and 28 adults. The tragedy prompted a big response from the royal family, and the Queen came 8 days after to visit the local community, and she planted a tree on one of the anniversaries here, and this is a site where people have been going to lay flowers over the last 10 days or so. And at 11:55 today, during that 2-minute silence following Her Majesty's funeral, we chatted to Gaynor Madgwick. She was a survivor. She was inside the school at that time of the tragedy. Her younger 7-year-old brother Carl and her older 10-year-old sister Marilyn both died, but she wanted to come here for that moment of silence to remember them.
It's that compelling feeling of emotion that overwhelmed me today, to be honest with you, to say a final goodbye to our Queen, personally, and for our community. The Queen offering her support, coming to Aberfan time and time again, it's built out solidarity. It meant that she had empathy, she had sympathy, she shared our grief, she shared our sorrow, but she's also seen the resilience that we have built over the years.
Well, the tree just next to Her Majesty's there was planted by the former Prince of Wales, now King Charles, back in earlier at another anniversary. This will be an incredibly special site. The First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, attended the funeral today. There were no major events here in Wales, no big screens. It has been a day of quiet solitude, people watching the events in a pub that we were at earlier on the outskirts of Aberfan, people in their homes just taking their time to reflect. But in places like Aberfan, where there is a strong link to the Queen, many have come down here to remember the lost ones, the loved ones they lost, and indeed Her Majesty.
Joining me now, Kim Hughes, GC, a recipient of the George Cross and who attended the state funeral earlier on today. Kim, perhaps you could give us a sense of what it was like to be inside Westminster Abbey today.
You know, it was phenomenal. The nation coming together as one to pay their final respects to Her Majesty the Queen, and to be in the Abbey there weren't really any words. I remember walking in, and just the enormity of the Abbey as it is without the funeral is just immense. But to physically be there, it was a lot of time for personal reflection.
Kim, perhaps you could give us an insight into your personal reflection, because I've spoken to so many members of the armed forces over the course of the last 10 days, and over again, everybody referred to the Queen as their boss. You swear an allegiance to the Queen, and she is your boss till the end. Perhaps you can give us an idea of what was going through your head.
Absolutely. I've spent, and I've been very fortunate to spend numerous engagements in the presence of Her Majesty. And you're quite right there. The Queen was my boss for 23 years. We swear an oath of allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen. And for me, it was time to reflect on not just my time in the armed forces and my comrades, but also my time spent with Her Majesty and just remembering the lighter times.
We're just looking at pictures of the procession from earlier on today. What a show from the armed forces there. We're seeing the Royal Navy. As you watched that, how proud did you feel today? These are images being beamed across the world.
You couldn't be more proud to be a former member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, to see how, you know, the guys and the girls pulled it out of the bag today, and not just those guys, the guys behind the scenes. I mean, this has been an absolutely enormous event, and leading up to this event this whole week, and to see the stuff the guys are doing in the background, but today to be able to say I'm a former member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces is nothing but with pride.
Kim Hughes, you were awarded the George Cross after your service in Afghanistan in 2009. You were working in Afghanistan where several comrades were injured or killed by explosive devices. You set about clearing a path to the injured and helped those there. You helped to carry out manual neutralisation of 3 explosive devices. This is why you were given that award. Can you talk to me about that moment? Because that is a top honour, and I know you will say that was your job, but can you just talk us through being awarded that?
It was an extremely good honour, exceptional honour to be awarded this by Her Majesty the Queen. To meet the Queen or any member of her royal family for the first time, it's such a daunting experience, but certainly Her Majesty was very, very good at putting you at ease. She spoke to you like a normal person, which caught me completely off guard. And from that moment through to leaving, I felt nothing but comfortable in her presence, and very well informed, which was just fantastic. It just made that whole experience that much better.
And everybody says about meeting the Queen, you get extremely nervous. And just talking about your experience in Afghanistan, I would imagine, have nerves of steel. What were you like that day? Because everybody says the Queen put you at your ease, but you must have been nervous in the build-up, right? She was the boss.
Absolutely. And, you know, as a member of Armed Forces, when you are meeting royalty, you stand to attention, you don't move, and you speak when you're spoken to. But instantly, I think she could see that. In the way she was when talking. And as I said, very, very good at putting you at ease, very good at talking to you on a level, which, as I said previously, absolutely threw me. And, you know, the Queen was very good at it. The King is exceptional at it. And I think that's just the sort of people they are.
And just a final word from you, your overriding memory from today.
I think it's the enormity of the country coming together to stand as one, to celebrate the life of Her Majesty, and just exactly that. Not just in the Abbey, but London as a whole. You know, we've seen it throughout the week. The amount of people that have paid their respects to Her Majesty the Queen as she laid in state, all the way through to today, the streets, even now coming here, the streets are still full of people celebrating the life of the Queen.
Kim Hughes, GC, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
This is Sky News live from Buckingham Palace. As the nation bids farewell to its longest-serving monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. King Charles led senior members of the royal family as the Queen's coffin was taken to Westminster Abbey. Prince George and Princess Charlotte, the youngest mourners in a congregation full of world leaders. Thousands of members of the armed forces from the UK and abroad took part in one of the grandest ceremonial events in modern history. The Queen's coffin was draped in the royal standard with the wreath of flowers requested by the King. Tens of thousands of mourners lined the procession route from the Abbey to Wellington Arch, where the Queen's coffin was then driven to Windsor.
And I'm live at Windsor Castle, where the Queen will be laid to rest this hour. Earlier, the crowds fell silent as the hearse carrying the Queen's coffin slowly processed down the long walk towards the castle. The royal family gathered inside St George's Chapel for a service of committal for the Queen. Then later this hour, a private burial for the Queen and a final farewell.
It has been a day of majesty.
Good evening from Buckingham Palace on a sombre and historic day for the United Kingdom, as the country's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth, is laid to rest. Later this hour, members of the royal family will attend a private burial service at Windsor Castle, but today has been about a nation saying farewell with full pomp and ceremony and with thousands of people lining the streets to pay their respects. At Westminster Abbey, heads of state from across the globe joined former prime ministers and hundreds of other mourners for the state funeral. In our first report this evening, I look back now at today's historic events as Queen Elizabeth is laid to rest.
And so the time had come. She was the monarch who was so admired. She was the woman many considered our forever queen. But this was the day we had to say goodbye. Upon the state gun carriage drawn by Royal Navy ratings, her coffin moved through Westminster from Great Hall to Ancient Abbey. Ahead, the massed pipes and drums. Behind, a family consumed by grief. Westminster Abbey was the Queen's choice. It is where she was married. It is where she was crowned. It is where she said goodbye to her mother 20 years ago. in the bittersweet way of succession, Charles always knew his first duty as king would be to bury his beloved mother. The service, 1 hour long, was conducted by the Dean of Westminster.
We come to this house of God. We gather from across the nation, from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world, to mourn our loss, to remember her long life of selfless service, and in sure confidence to commit her to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer.
Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself.
The hymn, "The Lord's My Shepherd," was also sung at her wedding.
Her late Majesty's broadcast during COVID lockdown ended with, "We will meet again." Words of hope from a song of Vera Lynn. We can all share the Queen's hope, which in life and death inspired her servant leadership. Service in life, hope in death. All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, "We will meet again."
After the service, the grey autumn day had given way to sunshine, and the Queen was on her way home for the last time. They are a royal family, yes, but also a real family. A family that has lost its two guiding figures in cruelly quick succession. Mourning, with a billion eyes upon you. It is the contract with the public, it is the deal. But at times like this, certainly for the youngest, it cannot be easy. The fact is, royal life is a public life, come what may. Good times, bad times, even the saddest of times. The last time past Buckingham Palace, and a last silent farewell from the staff. In Hyde Park, a gun salute from the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. And at Wellington Arch, one of the great landmarks of London, the Queen's coffin was transferred to the state hearse for the journey to Windsor. This funeral and the days preceding it were meticulously planned. What you cannot plan or predict is the public reaction. They needn't have worried. Along almost every metre of almost every road, more people. People for whom she was ever present. People who knew this day was coming and who, when it did, wanted simply to be there. A passing glimpse of history filed away forever. Into Windsor they marched. They are used to ceremony here, they are used to royal funerals. But never in recent history have their country roads been quite so transformed by the pageantry of royal death. This was the longest walk, the most solemn walk. But it also paints an historic image that is testimony to the special relationship between a monarch and her people. The Queen was back, but it was the saddest homecoming. Journey's End was St George's Chapel, the burial place for monarchs since the 19th century.
In the midst of our rapidly changing and frequently troubled world, her calm and dignified presence has given us confidence to face the future as she did, with courage and with hope.
Some of the music chosen was composed by the organist here during the Queen's childhood. He taught the young Elizabeth to play the piano. The crown was removed and placed on the altar. The King laid the colours of the Grenadier Guards on the coffin, and the Lord Chamberlain broke his wand of office and placed it there too.
Go forth upon thy journey from this world, O Christian soul, in the name of God the Father Almighty, who created thee.
Here Queen Elizabeth will finally rest alongside her husband and close to her father, her mother, and her sister.
Let us humbly beseech Almighty God to bless with long life, health and honour, and all worldly happiness, the most high, most mighty and most excellent monarch, our sovereign Lord, Charles III.
And so she has gone, a queen for the ages, duty served. In the words of King Charles, a promise with destiny kept. And so many across this country said simply, thank you.
quite a remarkable day in our history. And joining me now is someone who took part in it, Lieutenant Commander Michael Quinn, who is captain of the Royal Navy Guard. Lieutenant Commander, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Just first of all, explain to our viewers what your role was today.
So I had the honour of being the captain of the Royal Navy Guard as part of the Tri-Service Guard of Honour, and we were located in Parliament Square opposite the gates through to Westminster Hall, and we conducted a number of royal salutes to members of the royal family and to the state gun carriage conveying Her Majesty the Queen as it transitioned from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey, and then ultimately after the service from Westminster Abbey to Wellington Arch and then on to Windsor.
And Mike, what did it mean to you to be involved with an event like this?
A huge amount. I mean, on the parade ground and ultimately today in Parliament Square, we all certainly feel that we're representing 30,000 sailors and Marines in the Royal Navy, but also the armed forces more broadly, as this was a tri-service guard. And like everybody in the Royal Navy, we feel a strong affinity to Her Majesty the Queen and to the royal family. So yeah, real emotional, but a massive honour.
Well, I was going to ask you about the emotion of all this. Were you so caught up in kind of detail of what you had to do, or were you able to appreciate the moment, appreciate what you were involved in?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that I think I'll probably take a few days to take it all in and kind of watch it back, because as you say, in the moment we're sort of focused on ensuring our drill and standards are of the very highest. But yeah, I managed to keep it together, but it was a really emotional moment when the state gun carriage passed with my fellow officers and sailors, and also seeing the royal family, but ultimately a grieving family was quite difficult to kind of keep the emotions in check. But we've rehearsed, we've discussed it as a group, and ultimately we saw it as our duty to be as professional and composed as possible to ensure that we gave the Queen the best send-off we absolutely could.
Well, I think you did. You were obviously representing the Royal Navy, but what did the Queen mean to you personally?
Well, I've been on parade a number of times when the Queen's sort of been present, but I've never met her. But I'm actually from Lancaster. The Queen is a Duke of Lancaster, and like everybody from sort of the northwest and from the Lancaster and the Duchy of Lancaster, we feel an affinity to our Duke. And yeah, I think like anybody in the Royal Navy or anybody in the armed forces, the royal family and the Queen is our commander-in-chief, and we absolutely feel a real sense of loyalty to her. So personally, being a Lancastrian and also being in the armed forces, it was particularly special to be there on the parade ground today. Sorry, in Parliament Square today.
Yeah, and as you say, the Queen has a special attachment, or had a special attachment to the Royal Navy, with her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, serving, of course.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Her Majesty the Queen was the daughter of a naval officer, married to a naval officer, and the mother to two naval officers. So, as you say, a strong attachment, and of course, she met the Duke of Edinburgh at Britannia Royal Naval College, which is the alma mater for all officers in the Royal Navy.
OK, well, Lieutenant Commander, thank you very much indeed for being with us this evening. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, upwards of 1 million people are thought to have gathered in central London and around the royal palaces today to witness a moment in history. Mourners flocked to the capital on the national bank holiday, which was created especially to allow as many people as possible to say their final goodbye to Queen Elizabeth. Katerina Vitozzi spoke to some of those gathering on the streets of London on an historic day.
This was a day that millions watched, but that here they witnessed. A spot in the very front row of history. That meant for some a cold night under the flags.
We've just we've slept underneath the Union Jack.
That was the room
Stars,
with the view.
It was amazing. But the community spirit with everybody, just on another level.
It's a pivotal moment in this nation's history. Children will be studying this for many, many years to come.
And this felt like a moment people wanted to share, to see, to be part of, and to pass on.
My daughter's Molly, she's 7 years old, and I just think she'll remember this. It'll be a momentous occasion for forever. You know, when she's got children of her own, she can say, you know, I was at the Queen's funeral.
My dad always said that he remembered the sort of the coronation and stuff, and that was like one of his best days out. And obviously, this is not, you know, sort of a joyful day, but I just think we definitely will remember it. And I just think it's really important that we came.
In other parts of London, like Hyde Park, the funeral service itself was broadcast on big screens.
Almighty God.
But here on the Mall, it was just the sound, and it was deeply moving.
People that we've spoken to said that they didn't really know what to expect from being down here. They just wanted to be part of what was happening, and as soon as this service started being broadcast, it's been absolute silence. People not really looking on their phones at the funeral just at Westminster Abbey, but just standing here listening and being part of this extraordinary moment.
Some told us they cried for the Queen. Some for the memories her loss invoked.
My mum passed away last year, and she loved the Queen. Julie, you lost your mum as well.
I did a few years ago, and I was in the military, left last November, retired. So I think with our military background, we just felt we really wanted to be here today as well.
For the boss.
For the boss.
And then that final goodbye finally came.
In an event where every single move has been choreographed almost to the minute, it's those little moments, the spontaneous rounds of applause, which have turned something so public into something which actually feels really personal.
I don't think you'll ever forget this moment, where you were, what you saw, and who you were with, and how you felt about it. So may she now go and be able to rest in peace.
This is a place that has marked many royal moments. None, though, quite like this. Sad, of course, but unforgettable. Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News, The Mall.
Well, good evening from Windsor Castle. It's here in a few minutes' time that Queen Elizabeth will finally be laid to rest in a private ceremony attended by members of the royal family. Earlier, huge crowds lined the 30-mile route to Windsor, applauding and throwing flowers as the procession went by before the committal service in St George's Chapel, attended by members of the Queen's household and Windsor estate staff. Well, Ashish Joshi reports now from the town that today, above all, became Royal Windsor.
They came in their tens of thousands. Masses of people on both sides lining Windsor's Long Walk.
Are you
got very sad, really. You know, my eyes welled up because I thought that's the last time I'm seeing her.
She was an amazing woman, and she was so dutiful and so dignified and so dedicated, and it's just, it was amazing to have been here.
Being here, to actually witness this was very important to me.
And it was always going to be an emotional farewell. The crowds knew this as they followed the procession's every step. Some visibly overcome, others more contemplative. Major Rennie Chima brought his young family to help them to understand the meaning of duty.
I think, the people here, a celebration of her life, a celebration of everything she stood for as well.
Thoughts that were shared by Emma, who came here before dawn to be close to her Queen.
I think everyone is just really grateful and thankful that they can be here for her final journey back to Windsor.
A journey that was witnessed across generations. As the crowds begin to make their way home, they'll have a chance to pause and reflect on what they've seen and experienced here today. There are few places that will feel the Queen's death as much as Windsor. This Berkshire town held a very special place in her heart. And that love was reciprocated by the people here today, in remembrance of an extraordinary life of service. Ashish Joshi, Sky News, in Windsor.
Well, so many people will have their own personal memories of what they've seen or experienced today. With me is our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, who's been covering the last 10 days and today from here at Windsor. And what has struck you, Laura, about what you've seen today? What has moved you the most?
I think the huge contrast from the mourning and the state funeral to here in Windsor, this very private moment, a life played out so publicly. Coming home, Windsor, the place the Queen always called home, and now events behind closed doors. The gates here are shut at Windsor Castle. I think that contrast is quite striking. But the personal touches I think we saw in the committal service this afternoon here in Windsor were incredible. Similar music played today, as was heard at the funeral of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. A lot of the music arranged by someone the Queen knew personally, the organist here at St George's Chapel when she was a teenager here during the war. The fact we saw her horse, her favourite horse, Emma, standing there without a rider on the long walk as the procession went past, and the two corgis as well. And it's the formal and it's the very personal, and I think those are the two sides of the Queen. One side we knew, obviously the very public side, the private side, the side of her horse-loving, of her dogs, of her family, as that family will be gathering here. And of course, the standard flying is another big moment. It was raised as soon as the King arrived here, and a real symbol of the continuity of the crown. There is an era over, but there is an era that has already begun, and that is Charles's era as monarch, and as his reign begins now.
And we know that the Queen loved being outdoors. She loved being in Scotland. She loved Balmoral, as you say, her corgis and her horses. And just a short while ago, just half an hour ago, we saw Windsor Castle suddenly bathed in this beautiful, bright pink light, didn't we? And there's been so much made of the sun coming out as the minute silence happened at Westminster Abbey today, and the number of rainbows that we've seen over the last few days. But I thought that was an absolutely gorgeous moment, and it was momentary, wasn't it?
I know, and you don't have to be a spiritual person to feel something by the incredible weather shifts we've seen today. And I kid you not, when the procession started making its way along the long walk, we'd had a fairly overcast grey day. You suddenly looked at the castle, at the keep, and you could see the sun coming out. The flowers that were there outside there lit up. And then again tonight, just a few moments, for a few short moments, the castle bathed in this beautiful, soft pink light. And even now, the clouds are back and it's just starting to rain. It is a very, very strange and special moment, I think.
Laura, thanks so much. Well, after a day of very public grief and ceremony, the Queen will about now, be laid to rest here in Windsor in a private burial service. King Charles and other members of the royal family are attending at the King George VI Memorial Chapel behind me at Windsor Castle. Let's talk to Sky's royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, who joins us now from Buckingham Palace. Alistair, just talk us through what is going to be happening behind these closed doors.
At the conclusion of a very public day of ceremony and pageantry, when the United Kingdom enwrapped the late Queen in the splendour of a state funeral, and then brought her here for a committal in the centre of the choir. We're outside the walls as a very private moment takes place. The King, with the royal family, will gather in St George's Chapel alone. The Dean of Windsor, the Right Reverend David Connor, who we saw lead the service in St George's this afternoon, will conduct the interment of both the Duke of Edinburgh and the late Queen in the crypt of the King George VI Chapel. The late King died in 1952, and Queen Elizabeth II decided that a special chapel should be built in order to provide a final resting place for her father. On its gates, the words that King George VI used in 1939 on Christmas Day, when the Second World War was in its early stages. The King said, "I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, 'Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown.' And he replied, 'Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than a light and safer than a known way.'" Queen Elizabeth II dedicated that chapel on the 31st of March, 1969. Our thoughts are with the royal family as they gather around that vault and prepare to inter the Duke of Edinburgh and the late Queen. Within the vault, waiting, lie the Queen's father, King George VI, and her mother, who we knew as Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Also, the Queen's sister, Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon. The late King used to refer to his wife and his two daughters as we four. We four are being privately reunited behind this great gate. built by Henry VIII. Very often at an interment, the Nunc Dimittis is read. Somehow its words fully encompass the service of the late Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. The words go, "Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of people, to be a light to lighten the Gentiles, and to be the glory of thy people Israel." At the funeral of her father, King George VI, Queen Elizabeth II stepped forward and took a silver bowl containing earth from the 4 parts of the United Kingdom. With a silver escallop shell, she cast earth, as so many families do, upon her father's coffin.
for the dawn of Russia.
I'll be honest with you, look, at this stage it looks like Russia is still running out of juice, certainly in terms of conventional weaponry on the battlefield here, and it's always been Putin's way to sort of suggest some potential masterstroke, which doesn't seem, unless he resorts to unconventional weaponry, that he has at hand at this stage. You mentioned the Ukrainian forces crossing over to the east side of what's called the Oskil River. Vitally important because it enables them to push down to a very unexpected front for Russia towards the Luhansk region. We went ourselves to Kupiansk, which sits across that Oskil River, to see the Ukrainian advances and hear some harrowing stories, also mentioned by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, of how torture appeared to be a regular part of life under occupation here. There's no respite in victory here. An artillery battle still shaking the liberated city of Kupiansk. This occupation slogan, "We are one people with Russia," seems comic now the Ukrainians have chased the Russians across the bridge and further south. A shell has landed under 100 meters from us. Another swiftly follows. It's unlikely Moscow can retake places lost in the past weeks. So this is about vengeance and spite. This prisoner has claimed to be local, but they think he's a Russian soldier deserting or left behind. What else Moscow left behind is far uglier. These tiny rooms were their detention centre, where as many as 400 prisoners were held at one time, we are told. 8 or 9 prisoners per cell. Booby traps now in their place, a warning written next to this room. So he's writing grenade there on the wall, because as they move through these cells, they're finding booby traps left, it seems, by the occupying forces. That one in there, a grenade left under a tray of half-eaten food. And it just shows you the hazards that ordinary people are going to find coming back. A place like this, sure, used as a key detention centre by the Russians, but across this town the damage is extraordinary, but also too is the risk of unexploded ordnance and potentially booby traps. They're discovering too other scars from torture. This former prisoner is introduced to us by the Ukrainian Security Service. He says he was imprisoned about a month ago, as he was once a cook in the army.
Вот в этой комнате у меня проводились допросы. Меня сажали вот сюда на стулку, вот тут на стулку, вот там вот сидел следователь, вот тут сидел парень с телефоном, вот тут стоял еще один парень, который помогал.
The telephone was an old wind-up model used to send electric shocks into him. He thinks his interrogator was experienced from the Russian security services.
Мне сказали они, думаешь, ты крепкий, выдержишь? Мы сейчас проверим, какой ты крепкий. Меня еще стреляли из какого-то пистолета. Сюда стреляли, в ногу стреляли. Уголовных дел.
They asked him who he was in touch with from the army. The Russians burned their interrogation records hurriedly.
Главное выжить, выдержать. Да, я 1,5 недели отойти не мог, когда я вышел. Мне вообще, как обещали, что белый свет и солнце увижу на минном поле.
Elsewhere, signs of the mindset fueling the Russian invasion. They found time to paint this mural. A Russian soldier, see the Z on his arm, next to a pensioner and the flag of the former Soviet Empire, burnished in flames. Pause a moment here, in the bloodshed and ruin, and consider how truly odd this is. They were only here a matter of months, yet so speedily tattooed this building with their machinery of pain. So much here, clearly beyond use. So few locals huddle in its empty husk. Winning does not heal the wounds, just gives them enough time to feel them. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that the current pause, the lull in operations by Ukraine, I should say here in Kramatorsk, where we're standing, I should correct an error in our on-screen fonting there, we are seeing a lot of activity by Ukrainian forces and also by Russian forces too, and that is about minor advances, certainly. The larger question for Kiev is where and when do they make their next significant push? It does seem that they have the momentum. It seems they have the manpower and the equipment in their favour. Russia is still struggling, it seems, to generate a decent new front line that it can hold. Vladimir Putin, as you said, let's see where this ends. His Kremlin spokesperson today responded to accusations surrounding the mass burial sites at Izium and relatively to do with torture chambers found in deoccupied areas, saying that these claims of war crimes were, quote, a lie. But I have to tell you, torture is something that Russian forces commonly have used in the past, particularly in Chechnya. So we're seeing a very ugly face of what occupation looked like here, and we are seeing a moment of concern potentially here as to when Ukraine makes its next move and exactly whether or not Moscow has in it the ability to act deeply irrationally with something less than conventional, which would change, as President Biden said, the face of war since World War II. So concerns about what may come next, but abidingly here and in Kupiansk, a sense of utter destruction from the places that are liberated. Richard?
Nick Payton-Walsh, thank you, in Ukraine. This is CNN.
Inventing tomorrow for a future that sustains, in association with DBS Bank.
The technology of storing snow and using it to cool things has existed for a long time in Japan. Instead of using clean snow, we're trying to use road snow waste, and we must maintain the snow until the end of summer. A data center is a building that uses a lot of energy and emits heat. We designed this air conditioning system to use snow to cool instead of electricity. We're trying to commercialize the use of snow cooling and waste heat from the data center to reduce utility cost to zero for facilities with high maintenance costs, such as plant factories and land-based aquaculture farms. We hope that the Y Data Center will be the first in the world to become a sustainable, energy-independent data center.
We're often asked how DBS became the world's best bank. It's simple. We believe banking has a higher purpose, so we set out to innovate and serve you better by being a different kind of bank. Learning to think and act more like a startup, more like a friend, more like a business partner, and less like a bank.
For most of her reign, the Queen was woken every morning by the piper to the sovereign. And today, the musician who started the Queen's days brought her funeral to a close. It was a salute to the royal Fendersmith that was played as her coffin was lowered into the royal vault. There were many memorable, carefully crafted, thoroughly planned moments from today's state funeral. And here's a few others.
We gather from across the nation, from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world to mourn our loss.
Her late Majesty famously declared on a 21st birthday broadcast that her whole life would be dedicated to serving the nation and Commonwealth. Rarely has such a promise been so well kept. All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, we will meet again.
Members of the royal family, including Princess Charlotte, the Princess of Wales and the Duchess of Sussex, paid their own tributes through simple yet symbolic jewellery choices. It's quite common for the royal family to share jewellery, particularly that gifted to them from the Queen. The diamond horseshoe-shaped brooch that Princess Charlotte wore was a gift from the Queen, her great-grandmother. Catherine wore a pearl necklace and earrings that once belonged to the Queen, and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, was wearing a pair of pearl stud earrings that were also a gift from the Queen. Pearls are traditionally worn as mourning jewellery. The Queen, of course, famously would wear the 3 strands of pearls. Kate Williams joins me now. We are always fascinated by the jewellery the Queen would wear, because there would inherently be a story to it. It would either be given from her mother, or it would have been repurposed from something else, or from Philip, or whatever. So what did we learn today?
Yes, Richard, when we'd see the Queen giving a speech or one of her Christmas messages, she'd always be wearing one of her items from her jewellery collection, and very often it would be really symbolising her affection for her family, but sometimes they'd be international gifts. They really would always have a story, and they'd always carry a message as well. So I think it's very significant that we see the royal women wearing presents from the Queen. We also see them they did so also on Wednesday during the Queen's procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall, where she's been laying in state, and they were again today wearing gifts from the Queen, because what the King Charles has been talking about is the continuity. He's been saying he will serve and continue to serve like Her Majesty. Right. And I think this is also what is being reflected here, the affection for the Queen, and also that they intend to continue her legacy.
But they also, I mean, we'll often hear a piece has been borrowed. Certainly at weddings, they'll have borrowed a tiara or whatever. Do we know what's going to happen to the Queen's personal jewellery collection?
Well, there are 2 parts of the jewellery collection. There are the crown jewels, which number 100 items, and they are the property of the state, but they now are also worn by the King. We saw the crown jewel, the imperial state crown, the orb, the sceptre today being transferred from the coffin to the altar, and then they'll be taken to the Tower, where they're normally on show, and as we're seeing there, the Queen wearing the imperial state crown to open Parliament, and the Queen's extra brooches there. So there's the crown jewels and the monarch's jewellery collection that's been given to her as gifts, international gifts, and there's also the Queen's private jewellery collection, which has been given to her by family members, by her husband, and the monarch's jewellery collection, of course, goes to the next monarch. But what is the Queen's private jewellery collection? It is my understanding that that has been bequeathed to members of the royal family. So the Queen, as we know, was a master of detail. She thought about everything today. Her funeral, how it was planned. She also would have thought about what would be happening to her belongings, whether it was the corgis that we are being looked after, or her jewellery. So I expect to see more royal women wearing the Queen's jewellery we've seen with the Queen, because she will then bequeath it to Kate, to Meghan, to Charlotte, to Sophie, to Anne, and to Zara as well, and Beatrice and Eugenie, all the royal ladies that we've seen today.
There's a whole load of rules concerning the publication of the Queen's will, isn't there? It's not published as such. I seem to remember we went through this with Prince Philip, and a court finally determined that it would have to remain secret for the next 50 years. I expect the same for the Queen.
Yes, Prince Philip's will, there were various questions from the media. Could they see it? They wanted to see what the extent of his money was, what his bequests were, and it was deemed no. Most wills in the UK are public. Your or my will would be public. People can look at it if they wish to. That's a matter of legal public record. But it is deemed to be the case that the royal family, it is they have a right to privacy, and therefore their wills must not be opened. And if Prince Philip's will is private, it'll definitely be the same for the Queen. We will simply never know what has been bequeathed to which royal, and so we will have to perhaps guess when we see royals wearing various items that they were the Queen's items. And of course, the Queen had many wonderful belongings, furniture, books, fantastic wardrobe that you were discussing earlier on the coverage, the jewellery, so many wonderful items, wonderful belongings, as well as all the houses in the estate. So her will would be extensive.
The houses and the estates is a discussion for another time there. Kate, we have plenty of time to talk about. Thank you. Kate Williams with me. Our coverage of the Queen and the events of the day will continue. I'll be speaking to the head of the Prince's Trust, the charity that's, well, what happens to the Prince's Trust? Now, the prince that started it is a king.
The ever-changing weather around the world. Ever-diverse terrain and roads across the world. With Kumho Tire that has conquered all, there is no road you cannot go. Go with Kumho. Kumho Tire.
Thinking of banking in Africa? Think Zenith. In today's fast-moving, fast-changing world, you need a financial partner that understands your unique expectations. A bank with presence in major financial centers across the world, with the enabling platform to facilitate seamlessly, whenever, wherever, however. A bank with best-in-class financial solutions from a superb combination of technology and human touch for easy, fast, and secure banking that creates real value.
The final farewell, a send-off fit for a queen. A shattered King Charles leads the royals at Westminster Abbey, the funeral that stopped the world, honouring a long life of loving service and dedication.
Reunited in peace, the Queen together again with her beloved Prince Philip at Windsor Castle. Her grieving family says it's last goodbye, the closing image of Elizabeth the Great.
Heartbreaking loss, Princess Charlotte wipes away tears and joins Prince George in their great-grandmother's procession.
A nation says thank you. A sea of mourners, crowds pack the long walk to Windsor and fill the streets of London as the Queen passes Buckingham Palace for the last time. The ceremony watched by 4 billion people across the globe.
Paying their respects, the greatest gathering of world leaders in history, presidents and prime ministers, and outstanding Australians invited to attend.
As the sun sets on the second Elizabethan era,
the focus now turns to the choices that King Charles III will make.
what can we expect from the sovereign?
What can we expect from the monarchy?
As we head into what the Brits are calling the second Carolean age. And loyal to the very end, Mum's best friends, the Queen's corgis, wait patiently for Her Majesty to return home to Windsor. It's Tuesday, the 20th of September, 2022.
This is a special edition of Sunrise with Koshi and Nat live from London.
Hello and welcome to Sunrise live from London. Thanks for joining us. The Queen is finally at rest this morning after a long and loving goodbye. Her funeral began early evening in Australia, but some of the most moving moments happened while you were sleeping. The famous long walk at Windsor was crammed 30 deep with well-wishers. As the Queen's procession arrived, they came in their tens of thousands.
They are incredible pictures, aren't they? As Her Majesty entered Windsor Castle, her devoted corgis were waiting patiently. The pictures of Mick and Sandy on the steps moved many to tears.
And then an incredibly emotional final farewell from her family in St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. King Charles choked back tears as his mother was lowered into the royal vault to be with Prince Philip again.
This is a live look at Windsor Castle, where the royal family has held a private burial for Her Majesty after a funeral fit for a queen.
Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, the Queen, arrives home to Windsor. St George's Chapel, the final part of the final goodbye. The symbols of her imperial power, the crown, the orb and the sceptre removed as the bagpipes faded. And the coffin was lowered into the royal vault. The royal family watched as Her Majesty's reign gently slipped away. Beginning in London at Westminster Abbey, for all the grandeur, all the colour, they called it Britain's saddest day. Her Majesty was carried by 8 Grenadier Guards, bearing the weight of a grieving nation and family. The King, his siblings, his sons. Following, 7-year-old Princess Charlotte and her brother, Prince George, a 9-year-old schoolboy who will one day be king. Together they sat, the future of this ancient monarchy. Upon the coffin, flowers picked from the gardens at Buckingham Palace, Highgrove and Clarence House. Tucked in, a note on Buckingham Palace stationery. In loving and devoted memory, Charles R. The signature of Charles Rex. His mother is gone, he is king.
Here, where Queen Elizabeth was married and crowned, we gather from across the nation, from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world, to mourn our loss.
The service, the 9 hours of funeral ceremony, curated by Her Majesty. Hymns also sung at her wedding to Philip, a guest list no one else in the world could match. Presidents, prime ministers and fellow monarchs. Her third cousin, Queen Margrethe of Denmark, sitting at the front alongside Crown Prince Frederik. Across the aisle, Charles, Camilla, the royal family, under the strain of a fortnight of public grief and private pain.
Her late Majesty famously declared on a 21st birthday broadcast that her whole life would be dedicated to serving the nation and Commonwealth. Rarely has such a promise been so well kept.
The first sovereign's funeral at Westminster Abbey in 262 years. For all the history and traditions this nation holds dear, Elizabeth was determined to have this happen her way. Taking the long way to Windsor. so thousands more could catch a glimpse of the only Queen they've ever known, the only Queen they may ever know. Waiting at Hyde Park Corner, those precious great-grandchildren, a final salute from a morning sun. Waiting at home, her corgis, Sandy and Mick. This nation, the world, says goodbye.
And live now to Hugh Whitfield at Westminster and Bianca Stone at Windsor Castle. Hugh, an extraordinary farewell for a remarkable Queen.
Goshi, it was pitch perfect in every way. Not a step out of time, not a hare or a horse or a corgi out of place. It was the majestic, very British farewell for this country's most beloved monarch. And with at least 1 million people on the streets and all that public grief, there was a lot of private pain for this family as well. I think some of the lasting images of the day will be that of the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children. Charlotte is just 7 years old. Prince George is 9. They are second and third in line to the throne. They will remember this day for the rest of their lives. And King Charles, clearly distraught at the loss of his mother 2 weeks ago now, as the gravity and the responsibility that he has taken on takes hold.
Let's go to Bianca. You're inside the grounds of Windsor Castle tonight. After all the pomp, all the ceremony, the Queen is finally at rest.
Nat, Koshi, good morning to you. We believe that private burial service took place about half an hour ago here on the grounds of Windsor Castle at St George's Chapel. So much of the Queen's life has been public. This was one final private moment reserved for those who are closest to the Queen. The Queen has now been laid to rest with her much-loved husband, Prince Philip, and her family as well, the King, Queen Mother and her sister, Princess Margaret. It was a momentous day here in Windsor. The procession up the Long Walk this afternoon was watched by thousands. It was a capacity crowd, 90,000 people. They had to turn people away. And then there was the Queen's corgis, Mick and Sandy, and her beloved pony, Emma, the last one she rode here. They were there to greet her. Then the committal service, full of ceremony and sorrow. There was plenty of symbolism in there too, the likes of which we have never seen before, including that moment when the instruments of state which have adorned her coffin were removed and placed on the high altar.
All right, Bianca, thank you. Joining us now, Sunrise Royal editor Rob Jobson. Rob Jobson, what a day. I think the most incredible day that I've ever experienced. What stood out for you?
Well, there were so many things. I thought it was truly historic, but there were several things really. I think the majesty of the situation, the fact that there were the troops just immaculate from all around the Commonwealth. You know, all the different regiments, but the Australian guys were there marching with the Canadians and the New Zealand. I think it was something that we'll never see again, actually, because you know there's something quite extraordinary about what we're witnessing. I personally think that Windsor stood out for me. I think when she entered the Long Walk with the soldiers all marching in time and the thousands of people, 13, 14 deep, I found it astonishing. I found it really it took your breath away. Obviously, there were moments later on in the service, but I think the service at Windsor was just more personal. It was just, it just had more about it. And I thought actually the emotion of the event actually got to me as well. I thought there were moments in there. It wasn't the dogs for me and things like that. It was the piper actually that got to me when he played the lament to the Queen. You know, I was gone at that stage because I thought it was beautiful.
And everyone has a part that got them. For me, it was the grandeur of the Abbey and the Lord is my shepherd, those hymns that, you know, a lot of us grew up singing in churches all around Australia and around the world, and it really hit you, didn't it? Watching the kids, Charlotte and George, that was really, you know, quite incredible to have them on the world stage doing this.
The television camera stayed off them quite right because it was an events show with the BBC. But you're going to see a lot of photographs tomorrow of both George and Charlotte crying, which is, you know, they were there. The decision was taken by their parents for them to do it. Lord only knows what's going on in their eyes, through their eyes, of how this is unfolding. But I suppose in 50 years' time, when George may be looking to be the king, or may even be king, these memories of his great-grandmother will be etched on his mind.
Yeah. Now, well, I agree with you. Windsor Castle was, I thought, way more moving and way more personal. But explain to me what Charles did by putting the Queen's camp colour on the coffin, and then the Lord Chamberlain breaks that stick. What does all that mean?
Well, the wand of office, that one, basically he's saying, I quit. Now, he's leaving off. He's the most.
So he quits at the same time.
Effectively, because the Lord Chamberlain is the most senior member of the royal household, and so he's breaking that seal. The reign is over.
Right.
His tenure with serving Her Majesty is over.
So Charles gets a different one.
Eventually, he'll have to be bedded in. But the point of it is, he's saying, I serve the Queen, and I'm the most senior courtier. That's the breaking of that wand of office, and that's what it is. And then you've got the later with the earth that is then laid, and that's coming from the different four corners of the United Kingdom. So there's a bit from Northern Ireland, a bit from Wales, a bit from Scotland, a bit from England. Okay. All of these things are sort of symbolic, aren't they? But I do just think it was more personal. And the bit that really did sort of hit home really is that the lowering. I mean, we've all been there, haven't we? When even cremations, when it disappears, and it's normally that moment when they go through the curtain or they go down or they bury it. That's the bit which gets everyone. But what I found inspiring about that is that I knew, having been on the recce's, they showed us all around what's happening, is that she was being united with Prince Philip, who they had a pact. Whoever died first would wait for the other, and he's been in a vault ever since. He was not buried. He's been waiting, and then they will both be put into the King George VI spot with the Queen Mother, and the ashes of Princess Margaret, because the reason she had to be cremated was because there was only space for 4 coffins. In that particular point, so it was 4.
So they couldn't have got the Queen and Philip in.
Well, we 4 would have been Margaret, and then the Queen, and then Philip would have been left out. So the Queen and Philip absolutely wanted to be together for eternity.
Because that's what the King said, we 4.
Well, the King said we 4, but Margaret got in a little casket because she was cremated.
Right, okay.
Well, that's a bit specific.
No, well, it is. Lots of people are interested.
Yeah, that's a big decision. Yes. Did the Queen make that after Margaret died?
No, Margaret would have made that decision.
Right.
Margaret would have been told that the Queen and Philip were going to be with the King and Queen, and Margaret would want to be with the mum and dad.
Right. The only way in
is if you're going to get cremation. And she got cremated at the local, if you remember, that it was all going on then. It was 2002, and the Queen Mother had died, and she had died, and so she went to the local crematorium.
Wow.
And to be cremated, and then the ashes were taken to Windsor.
It is just fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Talk to you later. Just ahead, the royal family reunited by grief. The key roles by young and old to honour the Queen's life.
And Her Majesty reunited with her beloved Philip, the final resting place for a monarch whose reign has gone down in history. This is a special edition of Sunrise. We're back with more live from the UK right after this.
This life, it's the best I've ever had. Oh no.
I never felt so strong. I want to tell the whole world.
I know you do. After 12 weeks, you're pregnant. A twin's a possibility?
Oh, you can't tell anyone. Not even by accident. Got it.
Where are the crackers?
We're all out.
You had one job. Sleep on the couch.
You're pushing yourself too hard.
We promised each other that we wouldn't let this pregnancy get in the way of our lives.
Home and Away, this week on 7 and 7+.
For 75 years, Hearing Australia has provided expert hearing care to Australians of all ages across the nation. And to celebrate our birthday, we're making it even easier to access our hearing services. With more hearing experts on the ground serving clients in local communities. With telehealth and online appointments for ongoing hearing care. and audiologists and centres across Australia ready to find the right hearing aid for any budget. Because every Australian deserves to receive expert hearing solutions.
Hearing Australia.
Terry White Chemmart has real deals on all your favourite brands, like 35% off Optifast selected range and 20% off Panadol Liquid 80 capsules. Get real deals every day at Terry White Chemmart. Now that's real chemistry.
My toddler really enjoyed the Happy Day and Happy Night toddler milk drink.
I feel like little Miss slept better with it.
I do believe the product has everything it needs in there for her to grow up a nice, strong, healthy girl.
What a great product.
I think we should sell the house.
Local Agent Finder.
Local Agent Finder lets you compare agents, see their sales history, commission rates, marketing strategy, fees and reviews, all in one place. Be confident. Compare agents. Visit localagentfinder.com.au.
Before joining My Budget, we thought we were doing a good job of managing our money, but after only 8 months, we've managed